About 17 years have passed since Russia's 2008 invasion of Georgia and its occupation of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, an immensely traumatic event that resulted in over 130,000 Georgians forced from their homes. Has the passage of time cooled or intensified emotions surrounding the war? Welcome to the CRRC-Georgia podcast. Today, we're exploring findings which intend to answer this question. Our 2024 study, Conflicts in Georgia Perceptions, Attitudes, and Expectations, set out to answer that question, among others, which linger and continue to arise following the conflict. The research, commissioned by the Institute for the Study of Nationalism and Conflicts, the Levon Mikheladze Foundation, and the Caucasian House, conducted by CRRC Georgia and authored by CRRC Georgia researchers Tamar Khoshtaria and Eter Gagunashvili, examines Georgian public attitudes toward these protracted conflicts. Before examining the findings, let me briefly outline the study's methodology. Additionally, for the sake of brevity and clarity, we will refer to the occupied territories as simply Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and this does not imply any position on their status. The research employed both quantitative and qualitative approaches. The quantitative component consisted of face to face interviews conducted between May and July 2024 with 1,995 Georgian speaking adults aged 18 and older living in Georgia controlled territory. The sample was representative of the Georgian speaking population across the capital, other urban areas, and rural settlements. The study also included 5 focus groups with internally displaced persons conducted in August 2024. These qualitative discussions provided deeper insights into the experiences and perspectives of those directly affected by displacement. Participants, including IDPs from both the 1990s conflicts and the 2008 war, as well as their children living in various regions including Tbilisi, Imereti, Samogrelo, and Shirakartli. One of the most striking findings concerns how Georgians perceive the impact of time on conflict resolution. Approximately half of the Georgian public, 51%, agrees with the statement that as more time passes, the chances of reconciliation between Georgians and Abkhazians, Georgians and South Ossetians decreases, suggesting that many Georgians view the passage of time as creating additional barriers to eventual reconciliation, possibly through increasing social and cultural alienation, hardening of positions, as well as the emergence of new generations without shared experiences or memory of the conflict. However, the data reveals differences between displaced and non displaced populations on this issue. While 52% of non displaced Georgians believe that time diminishes reconciliation prospects, only 42% of internally displaced persons share this view, suggesting that those most directly affected by the conflicts may maintain a different relationship with time and hope for eventual resolution. The impact of time becomes even more complex when examining attitudes toward return. Georgians are almost evenly split on whether displaced persons lose their desire to return home as time passes. 38% agree that time diminishes the desire for return, while 36% disagree. However, many displaced persons themselves reject this notion. 53% of IDPs disagree that they lose the desire to return over time, compared to only 35% of non displaced persons. Data on contact provides further context. Only 17% of Georgians personally know someone currently living in Abkhazia, excluding the Gali municipality, while an even smaller 13% maintain personal connections with residents of South Ossetia outside of Akhalgori. However, these numbers mask dramatic differences within the Georgian population. Among displaced persons, the patterns diverge sharply. 52% of IDPs know someone living in Abkhazia, compared to just 14% of non displaced Georgians. For South Ossetia, the gap is smaller but still significant: 19% of displaced persons versus 12% of the non displaced population. The frequency and nature of actual contact reveals even more dramatic disparities. In the past 10 years, only 11% of Georgians have had face to face contact with someone currently living in Abkhazia, while only 5% have had such contact with residents of South Ossetia. Digital connections through social media or phone calls show similarly low rates: 8% and 7% respectively for Abkhazia contacts, dropping to just 5% each for South Ossetia connections. Among those displaced, however, rates of contact are somewhat higher. 31% of IDPs have had face to face contact with someone in Abkhazia in the past decade, about 3 times the rate of the non displaced population. Perhaps more significantly, 30% of IDPs have maintained contact through the internet, and 24% through phone calls. These sustained connections represent remarkable persistence across conflict lines and administrative boundaries. These connections extend beyond only communication but to relationships and friendships. Focus group discussions also showed that some displaced persons, for example medical professionals, Maintain contact with colleagues in the Gali region through conferences and trainings held in a Georgia controlled territory. Others in focus groups describe enduring friendships that have survived decades of separation. In contrast, however, in focus groups conducted with displaced persons from South Ossetia, some described complete social severance. The human cost of this separation emerges in painful personal accounts. One displaced woman from South Ossetia described how even childhood friendships could not survive. Quote, I had a course mate that looked me up and reached out. Then they asked if I could share pictures of my kids and asked if we could become friends again to remember the past. Then one day they called me and told me that their children wouldn't allow them to contact me anymore and asked me not to send them my children's pictures and not to ever call them again, so I stopped. End quote. The study survey also explored Georgians' relationships with those in occupied territories. Overall, only 6% of Georgians report having an Abkhazian friend currently living in Abkhazia, and the same percentage have an Ossetian friend living in South Ossetia. However, 13% maintain friendships with Abkhazians and Ossetians living in Georgia controlled territory. Among displaced persons, these patterns shift dramatically. 19% of IDPs maintain friendships with Abkhazians in Abkhazia, more than 3 times the rate of non displaced Georgians. Similarly, 11% have Ossetian friends in the South Ossetia region, nearly double the non IDP rate. Perhaps most revealing are Georgian perceptions of cultural similarity and difference. When asked about cultural traditions, 53% of Georgians describe Georgian and Abkhazian cultures as more similar than different or very similar. However, displaced persons show less confidence in these similarities. Only 45% share this view compared to 54% of non displaced persons. This pattern holds for Georgian Ossetian cultural relations, where 45% of the general population see similarities, but only 28% of displaced persons agree. This suggests that different experience of conflict and displacement creates greater perception of cultural distance, even when the broader population maintains views of cultural affinities. Despite physical separation and limited contact, Georgian attitudes toward potential coexistence remain quite positive. The study reveals a high degree of acceptance for various forms of relationships with Abkhazians and Ossetians. Approximately 83 to 88% of Georgians express willingness to engage in business relationships with both Abkhazians and Ossetians, regardless of where they currently live. Nearly 90% would accept friendships with members of both groups, and around 77 to 83% would accept intermarriage between ethnic groups. These findings suggest that distance and experience of trauma have not necessarily translated into outright social rejection. The study also reveals interesting perspectives on ethnic identity. 75% of Georgians say that an Abkhazian is just as Georgian as a person from Samagrelo, Kartli, Kakheti, Imereti, Guria, or Achara. 66% hold the same view of Ossetians. Georgian perspectives on conflict resolution reveal both pragmatic acceptance of dialogue and clear expectations regarding territorial integrity. The study shows overwhelming support, 84%, for direct government dialogue with de facto authorities in both territories. This is significant as it demonstrates public readiness for dialogue despite ongoing occupation. When asked about priorities for such dialogue, Georgians emphasize practical, human centered issues. Barrier free movement between territories ranks highest at 46%, followed by the return of displaced persons at 32%, and trade and economic relations at 28%. However, Georgian attitudes toward various resolutions that do not reestablish full Georgian state control over Abkhazia and South Ossetia demonstrate limits to compromises considered to be acceptable. While 75% find it acceptable for the territories to be a part of Georgia without autonomy, support drops significantly for other arrangements. Only 47% accept considerable autonomy, and support falls to just 16% for an arrangement comparable to state governance, as in the United States. The study reveals even stronger rejection of independence or integration with Russia. 85% find territorial independence completely unacceptable, while 91% completely reject the territories becoming a part of Russia. The passage of time emerges as crucial in Georgian thinking about conflict resolution. Almost half of the population, 48%, find it difficult to provide any timeframe estimate when asked about how long it will take to resolve the Georgian Abkhazian and Georgian Ossetian conflicts. This uncertainty drops to 34% when asked about timeframes without Russian interference. In this scenario, 28% believe resolution could occur within 1 to 5 years, and 13% think it's possible within 1 year. Focus group participants expressed mixed views. Some emphasized that, quote, most likely nothing will change in 10 to 15 years, end quote, while others noted that as time passes, quote, it becomes more difficult to sort out relations, end quote. However, the study shows strong support, 83%, for the position that official dialogue is necessary and must start soon. These findings reveal that 17 years on, Georgia continues to face an array of nuanced challenges due to protracted conflict. The data suggests that time has created both opportunities and challenges for conflict resolution. Although certainly having an impact, the passage of time has not eliminated Georgians' willingness to engage with those in the occupied territories. High acceptance rates for various forms of relationships and strong support for official dialogue indicate that time has not created insurmountable social barriers. The persistence of the desire to return among displaced persons, many years after their initial displacement, demonstrates remarkable resilience. Perhaps most significantly, the study reveals a Georgian public that maintains a degree of hope and pragmatism for eventual resolution. The strong support for dialogue provides a basis for the beginnings of a resolution process. Thank you for listening to the CRRC-Georgia podcast. For the full study cited in this episode, you can follow the link in the episode's description. For more information about this research and other CRRC-Georgia studies, you can check out our website, crrc.ge, and follow us on social media at CRRC-Georgia. Thank you for joining us, and until next time.